Hi, this is Andrew. I am the Managing Director of Dreamit's EdTech program. I have a great panel here today, and we're going to jump right into how do you partner with large corporates for EdTech special. I'm going to go around the panel and have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and tell us a little bit about their experience about partnering with startups, or in one of their cases, as a startup, partnering with the rest of the people around the room. We'll then go into some questions about that we prepared in advance to bring some of the key issues, tips, tricks, and pitfalls that you will run into when you try to partner with corporates. And then we're going to open up for questions. So as this webinar goes along, please, there should be a Q&A tab on the Zoom browser. Please don't be shy. Do ask your questions. We'll keep them in a running Q&A section. And we'll be referring to it. I will bring them in during the course of the conversation and certainly towards the end. If your questions are directed to any single one of the panelists, please specify that in the question. So let's get started. Why don't we start, I'll start with you, Jeff, since that's just how Zoom arranges you on my screen. Why don't you tell everyone about your background and your experience partnering with startups?
Thanks, Andrew, and welcome everybody. My name is Jeff Smith. I work for Penn State, and specifically I'm the Associate Vice President for World Campus Operations. Penn State's World Campus is Penn State's online play, and we have about 100 degree programs and 18,000 unique students studying online, not at resident campuses. And we're a fully integrated model into our academic structure. Obviously, because of online, we're always interested in being at the at the forefront of educational technology. And earlier, or late last year, actually, we partnered with Dreamit to run edtech specific accelerator programs. So that's obviously, because of the space we're in, we're always interested in new and upcoming educational technology, and Dreamit helps provide us a platform to get closer to that.
So in case you're wondering how we get these great panelists, that's partly how we do it. We partner with them. With that, why don't we go to Kai from Blackboard, also a partner of the Dreamit EdTech program.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello, everyone. My name is Kai Lu. I am the Director of Partner Enablement here at Blackboard. Part of my role, and chiefly my role, is to really find partners to grow our community, to grow our platform ecosystem, to find partners in educational technology that really help our institutions solve critical problems within teaching and learning. And to that end, we've partnered with Dreamit and engaged with the cohort, and certainly very excited to participate in this event today, and excited to meet and chat with most of you moving forward. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Excellent, excellent. And if Nicole will forgive me, I'm going to jump to Adam, because Adam runs, he's a superintendent for the Harrington Park School District in Northern New Jersey, and also a partner of Dreamit, running the Northern Ignite cluster, which he'll tell you about in a moment. When he unmutes his microphone.
As they say. Thanks everyone for coming in this morning. My name is Adam Freedom, the current superintendent of the Harrington Park School District, but also the lead of our Northern Ignite, which is a cluster of innovative schools across the northern part of New Jersey and New York. Our whole goal is to matchmake great edtech startups with great innovative groups so that they have the ability to get into a learn, build, and measure cycle rather quickly, and kind of debunk the past history of procurement in school districts.
Excellent, great. So Nicole, thank you for your patience. In case you were wondering whether it was just going to be partners on the partnering with side, Nicole is not only an entrepreneur, she's also an alumni of Dreamit, I should say. Nicole, why don't you tell them a little bit about your company and your experience partnering with, in your case, schools and districts from the other side of the table?
Yes, so hi, my name is Nicole TuckerSmith, founder of LessonCast, and my background is in education. I was a teacher and an administrator in the public schools for 15 years. and I co-founded LessonCast to address pain points in teacher professional development. It's a particular passion of mine. It's a real area for growth and impact in our current school system. Our vision for LessonCast is to continuously transform teacher learning in order to impact student learning outcomes. And with that, we're the startup seeking to partner with institutions, particularly K-12 schools, and within the higher ed sector, we partner with colleges of education.
Awesome. So, Nicole, I want to keep going. I want to direct the first question at you, which is, when you say to a school, I'd like to partner with you, what exactly do you mean? Is that just a euphemism for, I want to sell you my services? Or is it something different? And it's okay if you use it two different ways, but specifically in the context that we're talking about today, how would that differ from just selling at them?
Yes, so there's definitely a difference between being a partner and strictly being a vendor. For us, we really have a little bit of a rubric for qualifying partnerships. And so we have 3 C's. The first one is that there's a commitment. So there has to be commitment to working together. We have to have shared goals. We have to align on the vision. And then the second C is communication. So we need to know that there's going to be two-way communication, that it's going to be easy to reach the partner on the other side and vice versa, that they'll be able to reach us. And then the last one that we learned the hard way that is really important when you're establishing a partnership is that there are criteria for success. And so both parties know what a win-win looks like. And so that's really key, because otherwise it's hard to evaluate the partnership. What we do know is that you can't go in seeking to build a partnership by just, the only thing the other side is going to get out of it is whether or not you get a good product. That's not a win-win. And so we have to have criteria for success that work for both parties.
Cool. I want to get a couple more perspectives on this. I'm not going to ask everybody every question. So if in the audience I did not ask somebody a question and you would like their perspective on one, feel free to just put that in the Q&A and I'll ask them again later. So Adam, I want to go back to you now, because Nicole and LessonCast deal with K-12. When you're approached by companies like LessonCast and they want to partner with you, what does that mean to you, as opposed to simply, let's start a sales discussion? Or is it the same thing in your mind?
Well, I think that's the history. It usually was a sales discussion. For us and what we're trying to do, and Nicole's a perfect example of getting them in a lab site model. We try not to use the term pilot anymore. We actually think of it as a different kind of ecosystem that allows edtech and my staff and communities and districts really kind of working together. That's the collaboration piece and the commitment piece. We always talk about skin in the game. We want to make sure that there's skin in the game on both sides, not just the developer, but my districts and staffs as well, because I think that's the part that pilots have failed in, is due to the fact that there's an assumption of purchase on the back end. And to Nicole's point, if we can show good work, good development over the course of a period of time in a lab site, then that helps people make quicker decisions, and then procurement becomes a much smoother process for us.
Okay, that actually leads seamlessly to the next question, which is, what is the process? So in an ideal situation, or maybe even a typical to ideal timeline, and this one is the one I'm going to bring around the room to Jeff and Kai later. So we'll have an example from K-12, we'll have an example from higher ed, and we'll have an example from Blackboard as an LMS that is a slightly different process. When you actually do reach a startup that you think is very interesting at the right stage, what steps do you go through in assessing if you want to partner with them and actually getting to the implementation stage? Or how long is it? Let's start with that. How long is that process generally? Adam, we're going to start with you on this one.
Sure. Yes. Well, so originally it ranges between districts. So what we've seen in large bureaucratic model districts where, you've got 25,000 kids, that process could take a year and a half to 2. What we're hoping to do is create a system of almost very similar to how you guys work, where you're pivoting quickly and able to make good decisions based off of the knowledge. So our hope is that through our cluster work, through developing microclusters inside of districts, that cycle gets scaled down almost into weeks and versus years and months. So for us, we're trying to get people to pivot rather quickly so that they make better decisions, and that could happen when we're talking about curriculum revisions or products that deal with business-facing solutions. You should be able to turn and make that pivot rather quickly and streamline your system. That's part of what we're hoping to do as we expand our cluster out.
Cool. I want to go back into a little bit about what they can do to streamline it and help push it along from their end. But before I do, Jeff, I'd like you to come off mute and tell me at Penn State, what's the process typically look like for a startup that wants to partner with Penn State? Timeline, steps, generally speaking.
I mean, generally speaking, it always starts with basically a business problem that has to be solved. So otherwise, you're just talking to people and you're going to try and be forcing something that is probably never going to happen. So provided you actually have that basic fundamental in place, then it really comes down to, finding the persons who own the problem and basically who has the purse strings, basically, to be able to control it. I know we'll probably talk basically longer about some of the cycle, et cetera. At Penn State, an organization that's as large as Penn State, we do things as large as a student information system that's multi-million dollars that takes a long, long time. On the complete other end of the spectrum, we did 2 pilots with 2 Dreamit companies in our cohort 1 within a matter of weeks, months, that before the accelerator program happened. And so all that had to do with basically, putting the right set of circumstances together in terms of being able to, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more, things like security and data security and, money in place, basically. And it could happen in a very short cycle time. And like I said, there's 2 Dreamit pilots that are still ongoing right now at Penn State from the first cohort.
So just to add on that, the experience that we had last time was it was a matter of weeks to months for some of them under certain circumstances. And you're right, Jeff, I will ask you about those in a second. Whereas if it's kind of a much, much larger scope project, you're back into the year-plus territory, depending on.
Yeah, you just have a lot of stakeholders you got to pull together, and it just at university, particularly universities, they have tend to have basically a large group of people that think very differently across the spectrum, and it's getting all those people on board that takes a considerable amount of time.
Cool. So Kai, I want to get the Blackboard perspective, because you also have so many different groups within Blackboard, and I assume, or I would guess, that there's also a range of processes and how long it takes depending on what a particular startup wants to get from Blackboard. So give us a sense of what would be a quick type project to get implemented, and how long that would take, and the steps versus if you want to do this, it's going to take this much longer.
Sure, and I think we approach it from a different perspective than Adam or Jeff or Nicole, right? Because oftentimes, organizations will want to partner with us to gain access to our clients, who are Adam, right, and Jeff. And so the relationship is slightly different for Blackboard and how we consider partners. So when you look at our partner community, we really have sort of 3 tiers, right? And each tier really dictates the speed to market for our respective organizations. The first is the open source tier. Obviously, as a learning management system, we support industry standards, and we have thousands of partners that are integrated with Blackboard through the open source standard that we actually have no interaction with, quite frankly, right? And that's solely if somebody like Nicole, for example, could build a solution, use the open source solution, and they could integrate fully with Blackboard and be able to serve Adam and Jeff and their institutions and school districts, right? The second is what we call a BBDN, or Blackboard Developer Network. And that's probably a little bit faster to market because typically there's a pretty standard contract, right? And it's really around access to our private APIs, right? Access to solutions that will allow these startup companies, right, or vendors build solutions that are fully and deeply integrated into our solutions beyond just the open source community. And that can, honestly, it's a click through, and that could take a day, that could take 3 or 4 weeks, right, depending on the types of conversation those partners would have. And then we obviously have strategic partnerships, right? The strategic partnerships, and I echo what Jeff mentioned before, really are those that we at Blackboard, our institutions, right, are looking for solutions to solve a particular problem and has a strategic fit both to Blackboard and to those institutions. And typically those strategic conversations, right, and to build partnerships and to build a partnership model and a go-to-market model may take several months, right? Some with larger companies might take a year, to be frank.
Great, very precise. I appreciate that. I'm actually going to bounce back to Jeff to follow up on one of the points where I said I would. We said big versus small. One of the things that separates a kind of a big partnership from a small one is the number of people you touch. One of the other things is the cost of the contract, for instance. So are there certain breakpoints where below X, it's this process, above X, it's that process? And you're on mute.
All right, you got me now? Sorry. As you're talking to Penn State, and I would, with each of the school districts that you're going to be talking about, the K through 12, we're all public institute, to extent you're working with public universities and public school districts, we're all going to be governed by some level of procurement that's legislated. And or a large organization puts in place to make sure that there's a fair public procurement process. And at Penn State, that level's $10,000. So to the extent that you can do a pilot or some test of the project below $10,000, you don't have to get into a public bidding. So that's kind of a trick, if you will, or basically trying to do that. I mean, from our perspective at Penn State, we really are interested in partnerships. We know we're working with startups. We know cash is meaningful. So we're not looking to basically do free pilots, but we're also looking to try and how do we keep it to make it happen more quickly, how do we keep it out of the big binder or grinding machine of setting up. So $10,000 at a university, Penn State, I would suspect my colleagues, Dave in particular, have a similar type of level that they would work with when you're working with a public funding. If you're working with private universities, you're probably not going to be as mandated in that area.
Didn't mean to step on your toes there, Jeff. Adam, in your district, what are the thresholds, maybe at the district level or at the school level, if they're different?
So from a legal perspective, the bid threshold is roughly $30,000. It's a little higher if your business office is a quote unquote certified office. So it's quite a substantial number there. But to a granular level with staff, we do allow them to get on board, bring in groups, let us Shark Tank them, pilot them through their lab site, and then review them using a product that we do. So we kind of do it in two different ways. We know that there's that RFP process that if it's going to be an LMS or an SIS system, we know that number is going to be above that $30,000 number, but anything below that, we kind of open it up to our lead teams.
So you alluded to a great point.
The one thing I did also want to chime in is the one loophole that you have in this too, at a school like Penn State, is if you have a very, very unique attribute to your product, we can do something called a sole source justification because there's nobody else in the marketplace that actually does what you do, and that takes that constraint off.
Yeah, and one of the things that you'll learn as a startup is if someone loves you at the institution, they will help you make that case. They're looking for a reason to say yes. Nicole, I wanted to ask you, you've been on the other side of the table. Sometimes there's statutory limits. You deal with schools and districts around the country. I'd be curious to hear if the $30,000 limit is something that you see to be fairly constant, or if there's large variations. And also, if you could talk to the fact that the school, the district may have that ceiling, but the individual decision makers that a particular startup may want to talk to may have lower discretionary limits. So can you talk to where those ranges are?
Yeah, so typically if we're looking to partner with a school, usually the discretionary budget for a principal, we try to keep it under 10,000, just knowing what their budgets are. And it also definitely depends on the size of the school. So the smaller the school, fewer pupils, the lower the amount. Then when you look at, Adam's exactly right with the size for most districts, it's between 25,000, 30,000 is the limit before it has to go to a higher level of approval through the board. I will say that it does help to become one of those certified vendors. So we do that with certain states like in New Jersey and Maryland, New York, those states that we know we have built up a group of schools. We make sure we go through that process, even though it's a little bit extra. And we've also been on the end of doing sole source. I will say that usually our sole source usually comes after we've done a partnership. So we'll do a small partnership, and then later the larger contract becomes one of the sole source variety. And you're exactly right in that once you build up the relationship, it's a lot easier to win a bid or get the sole source justification. Those are all pretty typical and standard.
I want to keep running with one of the points that you made. Sometimes it pays to do a small pilot and then, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the concerns that a lot of startups have, and justifiably so, is if I come in at say $9,500 to get under that threshold, how do I raise my price later? So what a lot of we counsel startups to do is, that's not your price. You're doing some subset of your product that gets under it, but the price was always going to be X. Can you give a couple of concrete examples from LessonCast how you've done that so that you haven't ever created the impression that you were just slipping it under the door to like bait and switch, and you're always going to jack your price up?
Right. So when you have a conversation with any chief decision maker or with a group of decision makers, you're really clear about, here's our pricing. And then with this partnership, this is what we can do for this amount. And then you're really clear about the scope, whether that's limiting the amount of content, or usually for us, it's having a smaller group of teachers to work with, which really is better anyway. In the beginning, to work with a group of committed teachers who are going to be willing to give you feedback and really buy into it, and then later they're your cheerleaders too, which is always helpful. But if you're clear about in the beginning, here's our pricing, and then you start with a smaller scope, and then you can expand it. So we just had a small pilot that we did with a school district in New Jersey. We started with a group of 10 teachers for a small pilot. That might be 4,500, and then this fall we're rolling out with 200 teachers, and now we're just under their bid amount. But it's still with this idea for us, and we went into this partnership with them saying, here are our criteria for success, and if we meet these milestones within year 2 or year 3, we're actually planning to expand to your entire district, which is substantially larger.
So if it's per teacher license, you can do it as a subset of teachers. How about you, Jeff? They're close to 97,000 students at Penn State at any one point in time. What were some creative ways startups who wanted to charge at a per student basis and ultimately wanted to charge far more than $10,000? What were some creative ways they managed to limit the scope of the initial pilot to get you to under that threshold without ruining the pricing?
I'd say the most common way that we see is where people are allowing us to, in a pilot, license the software for free because that's already paid for or built. And then what we're paying for is typically we understand, and people are upfront, like Nicole mentions, that we're usually paying for like the setup costs and or maybe some authoring costs if there's some kind of like coursework that goes into it. So the most common way basically that I see is basically giving us the software for free in that pilot process, or limiting the number of licenses, and the compensation is for unique type setup costs and support costs. Another way that I would say that we're seeing with, obviously, this is again with a pilot that we have going from the first cohort with Campus ESP, is we start in the parents program, and it's a land and expand model. So, now we are working on basically bringing undergraduate admissions into it, housing and food services into it, where I get a critical mass beyond basically the parents program at Penn State, and a critical mass of units that can afford what the price ultimately will be.
Got it.
Yeah, and actually, if I can add to that, really when you're working in education, it is helpful to think about departments, whether it's in higher ed or K-12 districts. And so if you think about, I'm going to work with the science department for the school district, or we have a partnership with the arts department. That arts department is yes a subset of the district, but they touch all the schools, so it can help you to expand in that way. And the same thing goes in working with colleges of education. We might start with instructional technology and then expand from there.
So actually, that was exactly where I wanted to go next. I want to make one technical note. I just realized that this laptop is not connected. So as the listeners are entering questions, I'm actually not seeing them. So I'm going to get my phone to make sure I can actually see the questions you're submitting. Just as a reminder, the way to do that is to put it in the Q&A section on the Zoom platform. So give me a second. I'm going to reach behind me and get my phone. I promise you I'm not answering emails while we're doing the webinar. Now let's run with the point, just a quick wrap up. So you can deal with certain groups of teachers, certain departments. You can deal with departments with a large organization. I seem to recall there was one startup with Penn State where they actually limited it to just the freshman class to start with, or just the business school. And that made it as a nice self-contained unit that they could roll out to the other the other groups of students, the other classes. So we can go into more detail with that if the people have questions about it. By the way, feel free to submit your question in the form of, my startup does X. I'm wondering how Jeff at Penn State, we would slice it properly. So feel free to get very, very specific in the questions that you ask. But let's keep going with what Nicole just talked about, is identifying both the right school or university you want to partner with, and within that school or university, how do you find the right people? So let's start with the second part, and I'm going to turn it over to, let's go with Kai. So within Blackboard, if I am a startup and I want to work with Blackboard, how would you tell me as an entrepreneur to figure out who the right person within Blackboard is that I should be reaching out to?
So that's a great question. And, I think we are unique, or learning management systems might be unique in this space, right? So if you think about the conversations that Jeff and Nicole and Adam have commented on, right? They're looking at specific individual programs and being able to land and grow from there. From Blackboard's perspective, and part of the challenge we have with startups and what we're trying to change, is that our conversation are completely at the C-level staff, right? Our conversations and our selling cycles aren't targeted towards faculty members, right, or departments. We're talking to the C-level staff, the provost, right, the CIO, CEO, right, president, et cetera, where we're looking at the entire ecosystem. So having said that, what we do is we do have faculty forums and we have faculty programs that we run, and regional events that we run across both North America and international, right? And for those events, right, what we do is bring partners to those events, right, so they can expose their solutions and be able to target the right audience, faculty members, for example, right, to help the adoption and messaging of delivering their solutions, right, the startup solutions to that institution, finding that initial traction, and then potentially being able to grow across that institution.
I want to keep going with that. So I hope that one of those events that you're talking about is the immersion that Dreamit is doing at Blackboard within the weeks to come. Can you continue? Like, let's say I am a startup at that immersion, and there's a sales exec there or an account exec there that I think is interested in my solution. What should I expect the process to be to get from that interest level to them actually making the introduction? to the principal or the superintendent. I apologize, I just lost my voice mid-webinar.
That's quite all right. So there are different metrics. I think when our sales members, right, are having these conversations with you, the startup organizations, right, and trying to solve a problem for Penn State, right, or for the New Jersey public school systems, right, or for Towson, for example, right. Our sales organization understands the problem. They have typically contacts either at the C-level staff or at the program staff, right? And it's important for them to understand is what the solution solves, right, and what the cost is, how can you scale, right, and the willingness to be able to adapt to individual, right, and bespoke implementation policies at each institution, right? And those are, I think, the core messages that, when talking to any one of our sales organization, or really any sales organization, is be able to provide that value, the cost, right, implementation and scalability, support, being able to talk through those components and convince our sales team, right, that your solutions will provide and solve that problem, right? That's what's going to take them to the next step, to make that introduction to the Fairfax counties, right, or to the Penn States, or to the Villanovas, or to New Jersey public school system, and so forth.
So if I can abstract a little, broadly speaking, there's two parts. One, make sure you've explained what you can do clearly enough that a potential partner understands and can then relay it to the target for the introduction. But then even more importantly, make sure they have a comfort level with your startup that they're willing to put their reputation on the line to make.
That's exactly right. Right. Put yourself in Adam's shoes or Jeff's shoes, right? If you're a startup company, I've been part of 4 startups, right? A couple have been successful, a couple not so much, right? But when you overpromise and underdeliver, right, both your reputation and the opportunity for you to gain traction within that institution or school district, right, is greatly decreased. And quite honestly, the reputation with either Blackboard or one of our competitors might be decreased as well, right? And so it's important to set the correct expectations, to understand how you would support that institution, right, how you provide that value, right? And it's those components, I think, that really drive those additional conversations, particularly with our sales organization, or an organization within a learning management system, for example.
Thank you. Adam, I have a question for you from one of the attendees. Could you talk through for them the difference in role between both a principal and an associate principal or vice principal and superintendent, assistant superintendent? Under what circumstances should they approach one or the other?
So just going real quick back to, and I'll piggyback into what Kai was just talking about, and who to approach first. You have to understand that, the model itself has been like this and has not changed for years. And in the past, you have a group of leaders that are fearful of change, and because of that, they're not seeing the value added in working with young startups. And that's part of it. And then the second part of that is, there are sales reps everywhere. There's not a day that goes by that I don't have 25 emails and someone sending me a squishy apple in the mail. And at the end of the day, that doesn't get me moving forward. What I need to do is what Kai was describing is, I know what you do. I know how you do it. You've got to make sure that I see the value added. And I got to know your why and what we're doing here, because I need to feel that commitment. And to your question, Andrew, who those people are is your assistant principals. They're your boots on the ground staff members. Your building level principals are running your overarching space. That might be a K-5. It might be a middle school. It's going to range in student size. New Jersey is an interesting animal. There are 615 districts in the state of New Jersey. Roughly 400 of them have less than 2,500 kids in it. So New Jersey is a very interesting piece. We've got 20 very...
just compared to some other states where the typical district might have...
Sure. So if you look at Florida, where your countywide school organizations, where Lee and Collier County, they've got 100,000 kids in that area. There might be 12 high schools. Where in New Jersey, you might have a K-12 district with less than 1,000 kids. They might have a high school, middle school incorporated into that, as well as an elementary school. So you're going to get a pretty big range of who those decision makers are. And if you go into like a Newark, you've got to understand that RFP process is going to be a while, and you're going to meet multiple stakeholders over the course of that, where in a smaller district or in a mid-size, you might be able to get to decision makers rather quickly.
Is there a state, and this can be either you or Nicole, is there a state or a federal resource, like a website, where you would recommend that an entrepreneur go to get a sense of, in each district, it includes these schools and these number of students, just to give them a sense of the lay of the land before they go out and make a call?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of online websites, and the Department of Eds will give you the deep demographics for those districts. It'll give you staff sizes. It'll give you what we call district factor grouping. So you could really get in there. And what Nicole was talking about before is becoming that certified provider and becoming inside of maybe it's a Middlesex Ed Commission where they've already been vetted through. That's a pretty big value added for an administrator to say, this step checks the first box for us. Actually, let's run with that, because I wanted to cycle back to that when Nicole mentioned it. Becoming a certified or approved vendor, is that something on the statewide, the district-wide, the school level? How does it vary in terms of like very easy to massive pain in the butt? If there were certain places you would say absolutely worth the sweat, and other places you would say don't even bother?
So we tend to do it according to on the state level. I mean, different districts, depending on the size of the district, may have a separate process. I will say New Jersey is a great example of how to do it. Their process is very easy. It's online. It's not painful. Florida is not too difficult. In that state, though, you will then have to go through a separate process for the districts. Things to keep in mind are make sure you have insurance. I mean, there are things boxes you have to check. And in some larger districts, you'll have to add that district to your insurance plan. So those are just things to know and be aware of. And once you've gone through it a few times, then it's a little less painful. What
was the most unreasonable thing a process included?
The most unreasonable thing? They all have their own individual things that are, actually, you know what? I will say the most unreasonable process, which unfortunately we're working with some folks to adapt here in Maryland. The most unreasonable process is becoming a minority woman-owned business. That process, yes, that process is multiple years to go through. So it's not supposed to be, well, it takes a minimum of a year.
Okay, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
Jeff, this wasn't explicitly asked, but I'd like to ask the same question for you. On the university level, can you shed a little light on the roles of the president versus the dean versus the provost, and to the extent that those are different roles on the university as a whole level versus on the level of individual departments or individual schools?
Let me build on, I think, what a couple of my colleagues said in terms of just addressing this point. I think, the key things if I would say to people is you need to find two people in the organization. I think this builds on what Kai said, because they're the ones that are going to carry it forward. You have to find the people that have the money, and you have to find the people who actually own the problem that your solution, because if it's at a department level, they're the ones that are going to carry it upstream to whatever organization. At a university, it could be in an administrative sense. It could be in an academic sense. If you get in the academic sense, ultimately it's going to be carried up to people like grad school deans, division of undergraduate education provost, then to the provost, typically to make those decisions. In the administrative level, you're typically going to wind up somewhere in the CFO operations and the IT space. And, it doesn't necessarily have an academic component of it. But again, in either case, it's finding the people that own the problem that solves and who has the money. Those are the people that are going to push it forward to, which is, I think, very close to what Kai mentioned earlier in terms of having someone who's going to advocate and take it to the levels that it needs to have a decision made.
So just so it's crystal clear to the audience here, if you had to summarize the difference between a dean and a provost, what's the decision rule? Be as cynical as you want.
Yeah, I can be cynical because one of the things I think people can come into, I came from private industry into higher education, and the power structure is very diffuse in higher education. There is no hierarchical structure where people really say, this is the way we're going to do things. Simply put, the provost is the chief academic officer of the university. So they own across all academic platforms. A dean is going to obviously be specialized in a specific curriculum. So you could be in a situation where your solution is a STEM related solution. So you're going to be talking to the people in the College of Science and convincing them, and you really don't have to get to the provost unless the college needs money from the provost to do it. But if the college has the money, they're the ones that are going to be the decision makers, and that's where, again, a dean. So it's discipline specific versus, the answer to your question is dean is discipline specific, and the provost is across the entire portfolio of academics at a university. Ultimately, they may be the person that has the purse strings.
Got it. So if you can sell to the dean and it's within their discretionary budget to say yes, on their own, you may never have to touch a provost.
Correct.
Great. I have another question from the audience here. And it just succinctly put, it's the chicken and egg question, right? So you have a school, you want to partner with the school loves you, but they would really like it if you had 2 or 3 other schools that you were working with or other districts. So they felt more comfortable. They just don't want to go first. One of the more frustrating things that startups have to go through. Nicole, how did you get past, going from 0 to 1?
Yeah, there were a couple of ways that we attacked the chicken and egg problem. And especially in education, people are looking for ways to vet for quality. One way that we were able to find early partners is to go in on a grant together. So whether we worked at higher ed or at the K-12 level, by applying, and they're the lead in the grant. So they apply for it. But what we provided at LessonCast is a grant packet. So, we give them everything that they need to make it really easy to apply for the grant. That packet might include the research on our product, use case examples, results we've had with other schools and districts, testimonials, screenshots of our product, whatever they would need to apply, including if I'm the lead contact from LessonCast, it would include my CV and my relevant experience. So those are all things to make it really easy for them to apply for a winning grant. The other thing is if you can partner to, and this can be part of the criteria for success, is that you're going to collect data and publish some form of research. And once you have a white paper or, higher ed, you can, faculty may be looking to publish. So get some of those partnerships that require, showing validation, or part of the criteria for success could be presenting. So you may have one really great partner who also presents at conferences, and that's another way for people to vet for quality. Because really what they're saying is, I want to see who else is using it. Is that, does this really work? Has someone else already jumped in?
So if you can make it really easy for your partner to get more money, more recognition, and they just have to put their name on it, that's a great way to get your first customer.
Yes.
Any other tips, Adam? Maybe that Nicole's missed and she should try.
No, that's actually perfect. But there's also those opportunities to develop consortiums, right? So once you get that first group in, and again, forgive me for using New Jersey as an example, and especially the northern part of the state, where we have a tremendous amount of K-8 districts that work as consortiums. So there's already this pre-developed relationship. In Harrington Park, we are part of Northern Valley, and there are 7 sister schools. So our work with Nicole is only going to then be pushed out into those other sister schools. So now instead of it's 1, you're plus 7. And I think that's that then goes back to what I was talking about before about making leaders feel safe, right? So if Adam's taken that first step off the cliff and Nicole's brought grant money in and, we're presenting on our white papers, we've really kind of proven that we're not a flash in the pan. And I think that then helps you perpetuate the word of mouth, because peer-to-peer is still very, very powerful. That's just something that's still there as part of the superintendency. It's just what it is. So to get that kind of value added in front of them makes them feel comfortable.
So that actually opened the door to a couple of other questions coming in, which is, so how do you find out about these grants? Are these usually top-down state or federal grants where there's a list that you can look at and say, I want to apply for these, or is there a different process? So Nicole, you opened the door to it. Why don't you keep running with that?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't even, so usually there'll be a hot topic, like right now, there are a lot of STEM grants out there, or a lot of master teacher grants. We've most recently been part of the ESET 2 set of opportunities. That's all about elevating teachers and teaching. So you kind of just have to be on the pulse and be aware of what's out there in terms of a hot topic, and blog about it, write about it, tweet about it, watch the Twitter chat, see what's out there. U.S. Department of Ed publicizes a lot of grant opportunities. The state departments do as well. But a lot of times it'll be our partners who know about us bringing a grant opportunity to us, because there's so many out there. But if you write about key topics of interest, then people see you as a thought leader and will come to you with the opportunity, and then you just need to make it really easy for them to apply.
So if you run it up the flagpole, make yourself very, very visible, sometimes they'll reach out to you and say, hey, Nicole, you want to write our grant for us? We'll put our name on it. We'll get the money.
Yeah, I've had much more success if they write the grant. Yeah.
Okay, then you're the guy behind the scenes whispering.
Yeah, they write the grant, you supply background information, but it's always they write the grant.
So this question appears to have been written by someone who's been burnt before. Their question is, how do you know the person really has the budget? So I'm going to read a little into the question. I'm going to assume this is someone who's gone down the path with someone who they thought was the decision maker, gone through a fairly long process, only to find out that they just didn't really have the budget to do that. Can
I say, about that? So one key thing, so this is my part is real short, is that did happen to us one time in working with a school. And what I learned from that is the principals often don't know their exact budget until October. Because they have their pupil count after September 30th. And what happened was they had fewer pupils than they thought, and the budget was cut. And then so therefore we were too. So just understanding the funding cycles, that can have something to do with it.
So October is a good number. What's the other time? There's one other date of the year that I'm aware of that you should be, it should be at top of your mind in terms of budget cycles. Adam, you want to talk through the K-12 budget cycle?
Yeah, so K-12 budget cycle in New Jersey is spring. You're going to see winter development. Some districts still in the state of New Jersey vote on a budget, which would be in April, but the vast majority of all budgets are approved by county offices by that springtime. So while money starts to then trickle in by July 1st, you start to know, okay, this is my number as a building principal. Nicole's absolutely right. There are some times where summer goes through, we've already made our purchases, and hey, now we've got more money. So that period of time, late spring, even though sometimes I know the summer is dead, but into that early September, you can still be pushing.
So that's kind of double or nothing time, right? Either the people that you were talking to suddenly don't have budget and sorry, there's nothing you could do about it, or they got money sitting on the table that they can use or lose.
Yes, exactly. It's not going to just pop up in November for Thanksgiving.
Okay, let's keep running, and we've got a couple more questions I want to hopefully get to. And this is one that just occurred to me when we were talking. There are some tips and tricks around which budget it comes out of. So for instance, if I'm buying a solution, a service, it may come from one budget, but if it's bundled with hardware, it might come out of a capital budget or an equipment budget. Can you talk through, at Adam and Jeff, sorry, Kai, I don't think you have to deal with this kind of junk. But from your perspectives, what are some interesting ways to to put your fishing rod into the right pool? Jeff, you want to start with it? Like, if budget X is empty, you could go for budget Y by.
Yeah, I can start with that. I mean, at an institution like Penn State, we really don't have I want to say, a split between hardware, capital, those kinds of things, as much as really understanding the lay of the land and how higher ed funds. So, for instance, in an example, I think we talked briefly earlier, student affair. If what you're working on is in the student affairs realm, student affairs organizations, finding out where that's aligned and up through in the university is key to understanding how much money they probably have. So, so an example, like in our parents program that we were talking about earlier, they're lined up through our student affairs at about 70% of universities. At about 30% of the universities, it's aligned up through admissions. Admissions typically is a much more well-heeled unit within a university as opposed to student affairs. So we're doing this. So I think understanding the landscape of where the funding really is, it tends to be, I don't think admissions wouldn't surprise anybody. That's keeping the pipeline open for students and revenue into a university. So if you wind up in an area like student affairs where they don't have as much money, you work the problem like we are with one of our startup pilots, is you bring in other critical mass and expand that land and expand type model that we talked about.
So you could have like module A, which is a small entry-level module that student affairs uses to solve their problem, but then you're going to enrollment or retention to sell the next module, which they have more money.
Right, Andrew, I know you dismissed me as part of this conversation, but I haven't always been in this role.
You had it easier.
You attach yourself to Kai and go in at a higher level. That's the other way.
But that's where our lesson, that's where the lesson learned is, right? And I really want to highlight what Jeff mentioned, is to really understand who you're selling to, who holds the budget, right? And what your end goal is. For your particular solution, because oftentimes we see that perhaps the IT department holds the purse strings for this particular program that you want to speak to, but really your end result, right, and your success criteria is not just within this particular program, but within the institution as a whole, right, or other departments within that institution, with an entirely different budget cycle with an entirely different budget. So, I think it's important for you, as you have these conversations with teachers, right, and with programs and with deans, et cetera, is to really have a clear vision of what the end result is, right, and what the desired outcome is, right, and who can help you meet that desired outcome. Because the IT department might not be the right solution, right, and might not be the right budget. They can only take you to a certain level, right? We want to have those conversations with people that can impact you and your business at a much more substantial level.
Cool. Very cool. We're running a little short on time. There's one question I absolutely wanted to get to, and I'm going to start it with you, Adam. So there are a good number of startups that have tried what I call the teacher pull model, right, or the freemium to teachers. And the idea in general is they start with getting teachers to use the service. Maybe it's free, maybe it's very cheap. And then ultimately they try to get those teachers to lead them up into a school-wide sale or a district-wide sale. From your perspective, is that a good thing, a bad thing? Do you appreciate it because it means you're dealing with something that people actually want to use? Do you resent it because you feel like they're doing an end run around you? What are the more effective ways to make that strategy work, and maybe what are the ones that have failed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually want to ask staff to do that more, right? So, if you are a superintendent or a thought leader that is open to, this type of thinking, you're going to want to see that stuff bubble up. What I would recommend is a couple of different things, and to Jeff and Kai's point and Nicole's point was we're trying to solve a problem, and to solve that problem, sometimes you need to understand where those solutions are going to be. Maybe not grant funding, maybe it's part of the old NCLB, which is now, the ESSA stuff, where their first issue might not just be a solution, but then you're helping them from a fiscal perspective. I think the other part that you're talking about when it comes bubbling up from teachers is having a system in place that it can be reviewed and analyzed, right? So as I'm a school district, it's great that we're using LessonCast and Ruvnia and all these great guys and gals, but how are we reviewing this as a whole, right? And if you don't have that, then it becomes popcorn, right? Some are going to succeed, some are going to fail, and then that becomes a bigger issue for you. So I think you as superintendents and school districts have to have a process. And if you're an edtech startup coming in, not just answering my solution, but here's where I think we can find money, time, and effort in Title I, ESL, the old Title III money when we're talking about safety and security, that's a bigger solution, and that makes my life better.
Cool. So recurring theme, if you bring money with you, it's an easier sale. And more tactically that question, there's no resentment. A teacher pull model can only help, but it's not enough in and of itself.
No, and you also have the, I always call it mommy marketing. Don't forget mommy marketing pieces. One of the groups that we've been discussing, we shifted them into our HSAs or our PTAs, and I think they're going to, blow up because of that. They're going to do a much better job in direct sales because of that. So don't be afraid of that.
The Board of Education also may be a good point of entry in some cases. Okay, we're running very tight on time, so I want to do one lightning round of do not do this. So thinking back to the different startups that you partnered with, or Nicole, before you were the well-oiled machine that you are, things that, oh my God, if there's one thing you take from this, it is do not do this at home. Who wants to go first?
I could say just beware of a partnership taking you too far off mission. Startups can drown in trying to do too many things.
Give the concrete context. Tell the horror story pretty concisely. Where did you get pulled to shore?
Well, for example, if we have a partnership that requires building a significant portion of new technology that is not within your general area of expertise, that's a red flag. Because it's something niche that they want to do, and it doesn't necessarily solve a pain point that's more global, is a real red flag.
So politely say no. Cool.
Or yes, we're not the best ones for that.
Okay. Who wants to go next on the partner side? Like, do not do this. Jeff, you're on.
I mean, I'm not going to do the do not do, because this one's been gnawing at me that I wanted to make sure everybody had in place, and I would suspect this is a pain point for my colleagues in K through 12, is since most of you are probably dealing with a software solution and working with student and teacher data, make sure you have your security, your cyber insurance, all those kinds of things in place. Data security relative to students is a huge deal, and usually that's the thing that actually takes the longest a lot of times to get something through. So if you don't have those kinds of things in place, it would be good to get them in place now. Like I said, I would suspect it'd be similar for my colleagues in K through 12.
Jeff, I think you're being far too polite. What you really mean to say is, do not waste my time. If you're not ready, if you don't have those ducks in a row, don't start talking to me, or at least don't let me think that I'm that close. Adam or Kai, your turn to cautionary tales. Who wants to go first? Kai?
Sure. And I'll take this from the opposite view, right? Not as a client, but as a partner. And having these conversations, 10 times a day with companies around the world, right? It's not a do not do, but it's more a sort of rules of engagement, if you will, right? And how we talk about a partnership. Now, one of the key messages that we hear all the time is that companies, not just startups, but vendors across our ecosystem, right, want access to our sales teams. To be quite frank, right, and we have to understand, and I think it's important to understand that our sales teams have their own book of business, right, and that book of business is all solely based, honestly, right, on Blackboard products and solutions, and that's not just Blackboard, right? It's Canvas, it's Desire to Learn, so on and so forth. Now, when we have those conversations with startup companies and with vendors in the ecosystem, right, we look at, we look very strategically at solutions that really are going to help, one, solve a problem, right, for our clients, but two, that there's a potential for that individual salesperson, right, to be able to increase their book of business. Right, so it's difficult because they recognize that this solution, there's a strategic value to your solution, and they can bring that to Adam or to Jeff, right, and to the respective leaders at these institutions and organizations, and so we don't take lightly, right, access to our sales teams, right, and so please be respectful and understand that. For any large organization like Blackboard or any learning management system, right, that the access to sales teams is difficult, right? Now we're all building programs to help facilitate, right, and to be able to support our partner ecosystem. Why we're partnered with Dreamit, right, is to build these programs so we can help you gain access to our sales team and build a structure for you to be able to interact and ultimately, right, be put in front of our clients. But please understand that that it is there's some tension, right, as we work with startup companies and vendors and gaining access to our sales folks. Just wanted to that's a difficult conversation to have, right, but one that we're always asked every single conversation. Fair and good for you for asking, and I think you should. But please understand that if there are some hesitation, and that's primarily why.
I love the way the panelists are always far more polite than I am. What you're saying basically is don't be a taker, right? Remember that there's got to be something in it for us long term for this relationship to work.
Right, and be a very strategic relationship. So, for example, right, I've had a couple of conversations with Dreamit, both existing and alumni, where their solution is super interesting, right, that we have to work to build because we feel that there is certainly an opportunity here and a very compelling solution. So we need time to take that internally, right, and surface that up to the food chain. So our leader of our K-12 sales group, our leader of our North American higher ed or international will get that buy-in. And once they have that buy-in, then our conversation together becomes much stronger, right? And so
once they see how this makes them a hero and advances their goals, things go a lot smoother.
Exactly.
Here's your chance to end it strong. If you could advise the startups, don't do this one thing. It drives me nuts.
Don't come ill-prepared, and understand that we are building trust. This is a relationship, and you are competing against legacy providers that have a bigger megaphone than all of us. So you've got to make me feel comfortable, warm and safe, like a nice blanket, and when we get moving forward, that you're prepared for this long haul. I think that's some of the things I've seen, is that we don't want you to just vapor out. And if you can provide that trust and safety, then understanding your why is going to be even more critical. We talk about it in 3 different phases. It's easy to connect, it's harder to understand, and it's really, really difficult to engage. And if you can do all those 3 things for me, we're going to be a very successful team.
Great, I totally agree. No one wants to feel like they've gone out on a limb and been burned. So to the extent that the startup can give you comfort that they're not going to get fired for dumping IBM. Cool. Okay, we are a little bit over, so I'm going to thank you. I apologize for going a little over. I apologize to some of the attendees. We did not get to all the questions. Sorry. But I will see about it when we're done here. I'm going to try to get some of the specific points written up, and hopefully, at least for the members of the Dreamit community, I will try to post some specific resources and answers to the content channel when we're done. So once again, Nicole, Adam, Kai, Jeff, thank you very much. And now we can all go back to work.
I look forward to seeing some of you next week. Take care.
Yep.
Bye.
Well, have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.